Have you ever felt unsettled when you are alone? The reach for the phone before the silence has even had time to arrive. The television turned on not because there is something you want to watch, but because the alternative, the quiet room, the unoccupied mind feels somehow threatening. The scroll through content you are not interested in. The messages sent to people you do not particularly need to speak to. The endless small acts of distraction that fill the space where solitude would otherwise be. Most people, if asked directly, will say they do not fear being alone, and they may genuinely believe this, but their behavior tells a different story. The consistent, almost reflexive avoidance of genuine stillness, the discomfort that arrives quickly and reliably when external stimulation is removed, the specific restlessness of someone who is alone in a room and finds the alone without quite being able to say why, difficult to bear. Carl Jung observed this pattern across decades of clinical work, and his analysis of it was characteristically direct. The person who cannot tolerate solitude is not, he would say, afraid of being alone. They are afraid of what they will encounter when the distractions are removed. They are afraid, in the most precise sense, of themselves. And this fear, however understandable, however universally human, has consequences that extend far beyond the experience of occasional discomfort. It shapes the quality of relationships, the possibility of genuine the availability of the specific kind of peace that no external circumstance can provide, and that no external circumstance can permanently remove. Today, we explore 5 dimensions of why so many people cannot be alone, and what becomes possible when the running finally stops. 1. It is not loneliness that frightens, it is the encounter with yourself. The first and most important clarification is also the most consistently misunderstood one. When people say they do not like being alone, they typically mean something more specific than what the words suggest. They do not dislike the physical state of solitude of being in a room without other people present. What they dislike, what produces the specific quality of discomfort that drives the phone reaching and is something that the physical state of solitude makes unavoidable. Their own company. In genuine solitude, in the specific condition of being alone without the mediating presence of external entertainment or social interaction, there is nothing between you and your own inner life. The thoughts that you have been too busy to follow, the feelings that you have been too distracted to feel, the questions that you have been successfully avoiding by ensuring that there is always something else to attend to, the voice that has been trying to speak beneath the noise, and that the noise has been, quite effectively, preventing from being heard. For the person whose inner life is in reasonable order, who has developed some degree of familiarity and ease with their own thoughts and feelings, who has done enough of the work of honest self-examination that the inner landscape does not primarily contain things that are actively frightening, solitude is genuinely pleasant. The company of one's own mind, in this condition, is good company. Interesting, sometimes surprising, occasionally demanding, but fundamentally not threatening. For the person whose inner life contains significant unacknowledged contents, suppressed emotions, avoided questions, the accumulated weight of things that have not been felt or faced, solitude is threatening in a very specific way, because solitude removes the mechanisms of avoidance. It strips away the noise and the busyness and the social engagement that have been keeping those contents at bay, and what remains, in the silence, is everything that was being so successfully avoided. This is why the response to solitude, for many people, is immediate and almost physical in its urgency: the reach for the phone, the turn toward any available distraction, the sudden discovery of tasks that need attending to. It is not boredom. Boredom is actually relatively comfortable, the mild dissatisfaction of a mind that is understood. What drives the flight from solitude is something considerably more charged than that. It is the specific discomfort of approaching something that has been successfully avoided, and that the approach is beginning, very slightly, to make available. Jung would recognize this discomfort not as a problem to be solved by better distraction strategies, but as information, as the signal of what needs to be encountered, as the precise indicator of where the genuine work, the work of honest self-knowledge that makes everything else possible, is waiting to be done. 2. The internal void cannot be filled. From the outside, there is an experience that most people have had at least once, often more, and that most people find difficult to name accurately because the naming requires an honesty that the experience itself tends to resist. That is the experience of having everything you thought you needed: the relationship, the success, the recognition, the social life, the circumstances that you believed would once achieved, produce the feeling of fullness and sufficiency you were looking for and finding, at the center of all of it, the same ache that was there before any of it was present. The void does not fill. The restlessness does not resolve. The sense of something missing, undefined, unlocatable, resistant to any specific identification persists through the achievement of all the conditions that were supposed to eliminate it, and the persistence of it produces a specific and deeply disorienting kind of confusion. If this is not enough, what would be? Jung's answer to this question is the one that most people find both most compelling and most inconvenient. Nothing external is enough, because the void is not external in origin. The specific ache, the sense of something missing that cannot be named or located, is not the absence of a particular external condition. It is the absence of genuine connection with the self. The gap that opens when a person is consistently oriented outward toward achievement, toward approval, toward the management of how they appear and what they possess, while remaining genuinely unfamiliar with their own actual interior. The self is not a fixed object that once found, stays found. It is a living, continuously developing entity that requires genuine attention, the specific quality of honest, inward-directed attention that solitude makes possible to remain in genuine contact with. When that attention is consistently directed outward, when the inner life is consistently subordinated to the demands of external achievement and external approval, the self does not disappear, but the connection to it thins. The sense of genuine interiority of actually inhabiting your own experience from the inside fades, and what fills its place is exactly the ache we are describing, the sense of a fullness that should be there and is not. The attempt to fill this void from outside is not foolish, it is understandable. The void feels like absence, like emptiness, and the instinct is to fill it. More relationships, more achievement, more experience, more stimulation. But the void is not absence of external content, it is absence of internal contact. And no amount of external content addresses an internal absence. What addresses it is the very thing that the void-filling activity is designed to avoid, the genuine encounter with the actual self that only solitude, willingly entered and honestly inhabited, makes fully available. 3. Constant busyness is the quietest form of escape. There is a particular form of avoidance that is not only socially acceptable, but actively celebrated in contemporary culture. It is the avoidance that presents itself as its opposite that looks, from the outside, and often from the inside too, like engagement, productivity, and the admirable dedication of someone who is making the most of their time. It is the busyness that is actually running. Most people in contemporary life are genuinely busy. The demands on time and attention are real. And the person who manages to accomplish significant things while maintaining relationships and attending to their health and engaging with the world is doing something genuinely valuable. This is not a critique of productivity or of the genuine satisfaction that comes from meaningful work, but there is a specific quality of busyness that is different from this, a driven, compulsive quality that is not primarily about accomplishment but about avoidance. The schedule that is kept fuller than it needs to be. The commitments taken on not because they are genuinely important, but because the alternative, the unscheduled time, the open space that genuine solitude would occupy, is something that cannot quite be tolerated. The person who describes themselves as too busy to rest, too busy to reflect, too busy to simply be without a task attached to the being. Jung would recognize this quality of busyness as one of the most sophisticated forms of flight available in contemporary life. Sophisticated because it is so effectively disguised, because the culture validates and rewards it, and because the person engaged in it can maintain with considerable conviction that they are not running from anything. They are simply committed, productive, making the most of their time. But the test is simple. Take away the busyness, not permanently, just for an afternoon, just for a morning of genuinely unscheduled time, and observe what happens in the interior. If the response is genuine relief and genuine rest, the busyness was probably genuine engagement. If the response is a specific and urgent discomfort, a restlessness, a reaching for the phone, a sudden discovery of tasks that need attending to, the busyness was, at least in part, a vehicle for avoiding the encounter with what the quiet makes available. You can watch content you have no real interest in for hours and never feel the need to examine why. You can fill a day with low-priority tasks and feel, at the end of it, like you were busy all day. You can scroll through the lives of people you have never met and feel, somehow, that you are engaged with the world. None of this is engagement. All of it is running in the specific, quiet, culturally validated way that contemporary life makes so effortlessly available. The mind, however, cannot be permanently outrun. What is being avoided does not become less present because you have successfully avoided attending to it today. It waits, it builds, and it finds its way into the texture of experience, in the specific quality of tiredness that rest does not resolve, in the background hum of unease that cannot quite be located, in the dreams that try to deliver what the waking mind is refusing to receive. The courage is not in the doing. The courage, in this context, is in the stopping, in the willingness to sit with the quiet long enough for what is actually there to become audible. 4. Those who cannot be with themselves cannot be genuinely with others. There is a pattern in relationships that is so common, so normalized, so thoroughly built into the structure of how most people approach intimate connection, that it is rarely identified as the problem it is. It is the pattern of the person who cannot be alone, who, in the absence of relationship, feels a specific and urgent incompleteness. Entering into relationships not primarily as a genuine encounter with another person, but as the solution to an internal problem, as the answer to the void we discussed earlier, as the provider of the specific qualities, companionship, validation, the sense of being chosen and therefore worthy that the person cannot provide for themselves. Jung described the relational consequence of this with characteristic directness. He suggested that the healthiest relationships, the ones that are genuinely nourishing and genuinely sustainable, occur between two people who each bring a relative sense of wholeness to the connection. Not perfect wholeness. No person is perfectly whole, and the pretense of it would be its own form of dishonesty, but a sufficient sense of inner sufficiency that the relationship is chosen rather than required, that each person is genuinely present to the other as a separate, real, interesting individual rather than as the source of something they need and cannot find within themselves. When one or both people in a relationship are primarily there because they cannot tolerate the alternative, cannot bear the silence of their own company, cannot manage the internal experience of genuine solitude, the relationship does not function as a connection. It functions as a dependency, and dependency, however warmly it begins, generates dynamics that are corrosive to the very thing it is trying to produce. The dependent person needs the other to be available in specific ways, at specific levels of consistency, to provide the specific qualities that are keeping the internal void at bay. And this need, genuine, not chosen, not negotiable, produces a quality of demand that the relationship was not designed to bear. The other person is not experienced primarily as a separate individual with their own interior life and their own legitimate needs. They are experienced as the source of what is required, and the relationship, organized around this structure, gradually becomes less a connection between two people and more a management system for one person's internal deficiency. Jung's prescription for this is not the advice to avoid relationship. Relationship is among the most important sources of genuine human development available. It is the recognition that the work of becoming someone who can genuinely be in relationship, fully present, genuinely connected, capable of real encounter, begins in solitude, in the specific experience of sitting with your own company long enough to become, at least in some meaningful degree, good company for yourself. The person who has done this work, who has developed genuine familiarity and genuine ease with their own interior, brings something qualitatively different to relationship. They are present to the other person as a person, not as a resource. They can be genuinely interested in who the other person actually is, rather than in what the other person provides. They can tolerate the ordinary difficulties and distances of intimate relationship without experiencing them as threats to survival. And they can offer, from a position of genuine inner sufficiency, the kind of presence that is actually nourishing rather than merely consuming. The longest relationship of your life is the one you have with yourself. It is worth making that relationship a good one. 5. Solitude, used correctly, is the greatest transformation available. We arrive at the reorientation that gives everything else its direction, the recognition that solitude, experienced not as a condition to be escaped, but as a territory to be genuinely inhabited, is among the most powerful resources available for genuine psychological development. This reorientation is not simply the positive reframing of something negative. It is the accurate description of what becomes available in solitude that is available nowhere else. In genuine solitude, in the specific condition of being alone with your own interior, without the mediating noise of external stimulation, something becomes audible that the noise was preventing from being heard. The actual quality of your own thoughts, as distinct from the performed version of them. The actual texture of your own feelings, as distinct from the managed version presented to others. The actual movement of your own desires and values and genuine preferences, as distinct from the socially constructed version that has been shaped by others' expectations and others' approval. This is not automatically pleasant. The first genuine encounters with your own interior after a period of significant avoidance are rarely comfortable. What has been suppressed tends to surface with some force when the suppression is temporarily suspended. The avoided grief may arrive with an intensity that seems disproportionate. The suppressed anger may surface with a vividness that is startling. The questions that have been kept at bay by busyness may present themselves with an urgency that feels overwhelming. This initial discomfort is real and deserves to be acknowledged honestly, but it is not evidence that the territory is ultimately uninhabitable. It is evidence of the backlog, the accumulated contents of an interior that has not been given adequate attention, expressing themselves with the intensity of things that have been waiting longer than they should have had to wait. Past the initial discomfort, past the first uncomfortable encounters with what the silence makes available, something shifts. The intensity moderates. The suppressed feelings, once genuinely felt, begin to move through rather than simply accumulating. The avoided questions, once genuinely engaged with, often turn out to be less terrifying than the avoidance of them had suggested, and in the space that opens as the accumulated backlog begins to process, something else becomes available. The genuine quiet, that is not the absence of internal content but the presence of genuine familiarity with it. This is the solitude that transforms, not the silence that is merely the absence of noise. That kind of silence remains threatening as long as what it makes audible remains unacknowledged. But the silence of someone who has learned to inhabit their own interior with some degree of genuine ease, who has developed enough familiarity with the actual contents of their own mind, that the silence is not the approach of something threatening but the availability of something genuinely valuable, the specific, irreplaceable access to yourself that the noise was preventing. In this quality of solitude, things become clear that the noise obscures the direction that is genuinely yours, as distinct from the direction that others' expectations have been suggesting. The values that actually organize your choices, as distinct from the ones you have been performing. The specific quality of life that would genuinely nourish you, as distinct from the one you have been pursuing, because it looked like the right answer from the outside. Jung understood this access as among the most important available to any human being engaged in the genuine work of becoming fully themselves. The individuation process, the lifelong journey toward genuine psychological wholeness, cannot occur primarily in the company of others. It requires the specific interior work that only genuine solitude makes possible. The confrontation with the shadow, the encounter with the deeper layers of the self, the development of the inner authority that does not depend on external confirmation because it has been built from the inside. In the specific quiet of genuine aloneness, the silence you have been running from is not empty. It is full of everything that has been waiting, with genuine patience, for your honest attention. And what you will find there, when you finally stop running long enough to look, is not the devastation that the running suggested it would be. It is yourself, more complete, more interesting, more genuinely at home in its own existence than the distracted, running version ever managed to be. We have explored today 5 dimensions of one of the most universal and most significant challenges available in contemporary psychological life. The challenge of genuine solitude. From the recognition that what frightens is not aloneness itself, but the encounter with the self that aloneness makes unavoidable. Through the understanding that the internal void cannot be filled from outside, that the specific ache of disconnection from the self is an internal condition that requires an internal response. Through the honest examination of busyness as avoidance, the quietest and most culturally validated form of running available. Through the recognition that the capacity for genuine relationship is built, not despite solitude, but through it, that the person who cannot be alone cannot be genuinely with anyone else. And finally, into the transformation that becomes available when solitude is entered willingly, rather than endured reluctantly, the specific, irreplaceable access to the self that the noise was preventing. The fear of solitude is the fear of yourself, and the self that is being feared is not, in truth, as frightening as the running from it has suggested. It is beneath the suppressed feelings and the avoided questions and the accumulated contents of an interior that has not been given adequate attention. Something considerably more interesting and considerably more worth knowing than the distracted, outward-oriented life of avoidance has allowed you to discover. Stop running. Not forever, not all at once, not in some dramatic gesture of total interior confrontation, but in the small, daily, increasingly available practice of simply being with yourself for a little while without the phone, without the noise, without the task attached to the being, and discovering what is actually there. The longest relationship of your life is the one you are having with yourself. It deserves the same quality of honest attention, the same genuine curiosity, the same willingness to show up fully and stay present through difficulty that you have been offering to everything and everyone else. It has been waiting for that attention for a long time. You are the company you keep most consistently. It is worth learning to keep it well.